people of not really being able to make it on their own.
Certainly, and I would say that if we look at beyond the understanding that this is an issue for those who live in dire poverty, or an issue for those who are in some way unable to either be educated or unable to function in society. The issue is beyond that. The issue is about young people who are leaving college without an opportunity to grow economically, as did their grandparents or perhaps great-grandparents before them.
Right. I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, I think folks who are who've graduated from college during the recession and the period that's continuing to follow it up, where we're facing high unemployment, through no fault of their own, through just poor timing and essentially bad luck on their part. I mean, we can put aside if whether it's luck or whether who was responsible for what happened to the economy, but so they're facing the difficulty that they're finding in having and finding an initial job. That's gonna, their sort of slow initial earnings and the kind of positions, in low wage industries, in fast food and retail, that many people with college degrees that are graduating now are having to accept. That's gonna stay with them for life in terms of their earning growth, to start from such a humble place through because of the recession and the poor timing of, when they happen to graduate from college. So, and again, even people, I mean, we're still at a point where the opportunities that are available for people are significantly less in terms of employment, number of jobs, and the earnings in those jobs considerably worse off than we were before the recession. So although the stock market has recovered, although the real estate market has recovered, which again means that people face high housing costs, real median earnings have continued to decline every year that we have data since prior to the recession. Unemployment has started to decline, but some of that is actually due to people dropping out of the labor force because they become discouraged. So, and then the other issue around unemployment is, on the one hand, we're seeing some encouraging declines in the unemployment rates in the county, but a lot of that again is adding low wage jobs. So, for instance, in the last year, during 2013, over 5,000 of the jobs that we added, about 23% of the total net jobs added in last year were restaurant jobs that were not at full service restaurants. So essentially most of those are fast food jobs, which is, kind of brings us back to this idea around, minimum wage as a policy, is because one of the things, we have a great tourism economy here in San Diego in terms of creating jobs, but those jobs don't always pay particularly well. And so we need to raise the bar in terms of making sure that the jobs, so on the one hand, the jobs that we are creating or have created that don't pay enough for people to meet their basic needs, we need policies that help the folks who work in those jobs and their families earn enough to meet their basic needs. And in fact, one of the findings that we have coming out is that of the families and households in the county, even those working year-round, full-time, have a household head that works full-time year-round, almost a quarter, 23.5%, are still below, the self-sufficiency wage standards that we've identified here. So, and we think that's a problem. So one of the issues is policies that take those folks who are already in low-wage jobs and raise the wages in those jobs. And then I think the other thing that we really need to look at is, how do we as a community generate new jobs that aren't those low-wage jobs, but that are the jobs that have middle-class salaries. We're actually doing a reasonably good job at creating, some great opportunities in the high-tech industries and biotech and whatnot for highly educated people. But there's really a gap in the middle, and we really need to figure out how we can generate jobs in manufacturing or in other industries, healthcare, that provide opportunities for people to have middle-class incomes and careers.
Mm-hmm. There are two questions that come to mind, one of which is around that issue of infrastructure and what it would take in order to shift how manufacturing is done, in order to shift how we do business, in order to shift what the corporate environment offers. Do you have any insight with regard to next steps to get us beyond our present condition?
I mean, in terms of what it's going to take to attract those kind of jobs to the region or create them, I don't have a silver bullet right now. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're really looking at is what's working already, because manufacturing has been growing somewhat. So I think we need to take a look at what's working, and then also, I mean, I think some of the other issues are just making sure that and working with our community colleges and our colleges to really look at our region and at other regions which we compete with economically in terms of, what are the industries that are growing, what do the jobs that are going to pay middle class wages in those industries require in terms of training, to make sure that we're training the people who live in San Diego County to be the people who can do those jobs, because that's one of the things, both in terms of making sure that the jobs that are there are really filled by people who already live here and need jobs, rather than people who have the skills that those companies need and are recruited from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And also to make sure that we're creating an environment that's attractive to the companies that want to provide those jobs, because we have a highly trained workforce that they can rely on to do the work.
Mm-hmm. And for those persons who are not highly trained,
I mean, I think that's obviously that's one of the challenges. And so, I mean, I think, that's an area where we can't necessarily rely on business to make the investment to provide that training. And I think we really need to make sure, first of all, that our educational system, starting in kindergarten or even preschool, is really providing the education that people need, not just, to get a job, but to be full citizens and educated enough to meet the needs of employers, but also to be full citizens in every way. So, I mean, I think we need to make sure that our educational system, that we are investing in our public educational system to create, a skilled workforce and a thoughtful citizenry. So, that's one of the biggest issues. I mean, I think, we need to also sort of look at beyond K through 12 or higher education. What do we do? How do we what do we do for the folks that are adults now but don't have the skills that current jobs require, whether that's folks who are 50 plus who have been out of work in this recession because their company folded, or any of a number of other issues, or whether it's young people who haven't found a first job yet and may not have a college education yet. But yeah, so we definitely need to focus on approaches to training those folks. We've been in conversations with a number of organizations for workforce partnerships in San Diego. I mean, I think that's something that we as a region are trying to figure out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we absolutely need to figure out not only the sort of linear path through our educational system, but how do we provide the training to get jobs for those who are most vulnerable and most shut out of the labor market right now. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I have a theoretical question for you, mm-hmm. and it relates to the notion of millennials being less willing to commit on the long term, and that would be held in contrast to the corporate or the old corporate model of a job for a lifetime. Can you speak to those two pieces of the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a number of people have experienced during this recession that they don't have jobs for a lifetime, and that, companies are, so I think that for, I would say for worse, but regardless of our values about it, that companies are increasingly sort of focused on a leaner production model where they're, only hiring the people that they need during the times that they need them, and often not hiring them directly as their own employees, but hiring them through temp services or as independent contractors. So in terms of, which I think is something that we need to address to make sure that folks have full rights as employees whenever possible. So, but I think on the one hand, companies have really sort of pulled back from their end of the bargain, and I think millennials, I don't know to what extent that sort of stereotype or understanding reflects sort of a set of preferences of this current generation or the reality that they face in terms of long-term jobs just not really being there. I mean, I think there's ways to make for instance, Holland has, Holland's labor market tends to be much more sort of short-term jobs, and there's a lot of flexibility there, but because the basic benefits, healthcare, pension, and whatnot are all provided by the government, it sort of creates a situation where that both employees and companies have additional flexibility in terms of, if I take a 5-month stint to work on this, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to have healthcare when that job is over, and so there's sort of some additional flexibility that having that sort of basic, I don't even want to say safety net, but sort of guaranteed level of services that the government is providing to everyone makes it easier for both companies and workers to enter into more flexible arrangements and still have a productive workforce that's getting all its needs met.
I remember your reference to San Diego, perhaps as a model for the region. Can you look nationally at other models and within that conversation lift up that which is being successful? Yeah,
I mean, I think sort of at the statewide level, I mentioned in passing both San Francisco and San Jose. I mean, San Francisco has been very successful, first with, a living wage mandate. They have somewhat, they've done some things that we can't do because they're both a city and a county all rolled into one, but in terms of providing health care, even before the Affordable Care Act, in terms of requiring employers to make contributions for health care, for paid sick days, things along those lines. Interesting things are happening in Seattle, New York, Washington, D.C. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of movement around, particularly these issues that I just mentioned in terms of minimum wage, and also, earned or paid sick time for folks is something that's, we also just released or worked with the Institute for Women's Policy Research on a report that found that 44% of private employees in San Diego don't have access to paid sick time, so they face a very difficult choice between, when their kids become sick or when they become sick, whether they show up for work, perhaps ill, or whether they lose a day's pay or risk even losing their job by not coming in. So, this is an area where a lot of cities have taken some action to guarantee that employees have access to that as a basic employment right. So, I mean, I think, there's definitely some models that we can look to, beyond the county, across the state and across the country in terms of policies that help us, on the one hand, meet the needs of workers and their families, and on the other hand, in the process, don't just, also help build the regional economy.
There's a growing wellspring, especially among grassroots advocates who are working to firstly highlight and make visible the conversation around livable wage. And we're so grateful that you are at work as a researcher and demographer to help us understand from an empirical basis that it's not just something to talk about, that the impact is real, and the significant ways in which the absence of a livable wage in our community will affect our community, not just a small group, but the entirety of our area. So thank you so much, Dr. Brownell, for being with us this day, and we look forward to additional conversation with you and wish you well.